Jon Patch, Director of the North Dakota State Water Commission Water Appropriation Division.
Outstanding. Thank you for joining us today. And wanted to talk a little bit about just water in general when we're talking about the Bakken. So much is said about fresh water and water needs. And I think I saw a story where the Bakken even has some projection changes in terms of how much water is needed. But I'd like to start off with the Davis Refinery. We do a weekly segment on this program on the Davis Refinery. We've had everybody from the health department from engineers that have worked on the project to local county commissioners, as well as the CEO for Meridian. And it's kind of it's a heck of a project. I mean, the first greenfield refinery in 50 years, so they have their environmental hurdles to climb, so to speak, or to jump over. But there's also the water side of things that I would imagine came into play during a lot of the permit process and just working with it. So, Mr. Jon Patch, have you been working on this Davis project, this Davis Refinery much?
Well, yes, we have. Our staff has been busy with evaluating the water permit application, and as you well know, just about every industry out there requires water in their process or in their needs, and the refinery obviously is one of those industries that does require a significant amount of water. And in this state, our water is considered to be waters of the state, and you need to get a permit to use that water, whether it's groundwater or surface water. Both require a permit from the state engineer. And so they did make an application for groundwater for use in the refinery process. They did indicate in the application phase as well that the water was going to be the source water was going to be from the Dakota Formation, which is a deep buried, confined aquifer, but it's a waste aquifer area where wastewater is put, and so all of the saltwater injection wells in the western part of the state, basically, for the most part, are most of those are down into the Dakota. So wastewater is actually put down in there because it's not used for potable sources by anybody out in the west. So the quality is not a concern to put wastewater down into it. And of course, that means that there's a lot of water available there for appropriation for a beneficial use. So the permit application was made by the applicant, and they then went through a process of public review and comment, and the hydrologist then took the information and did a technical analysis and responded to all of the concerns that were expressed during the comment period and issued a recommended decision. And the recommended decision then is another formal document that has the availability for the public to review and comment on if you're a party of record. So there were several parties of record that did do that, where they both commented and requested that it be moved forward into what's called an adjudicative proceeding. And so that's where we're at with the application from the Meridian Group for the Davis Refinery.
How's it been working on this big project? I mean, I was talking to Terry O'Clair, and he mentioned EPA, and I'm thinking, oh, that's right. A project of this magnitude, there's a reason hasn't come along in 50 years. So, you're dealing with engineers and like I mentioned, a CEO, and I would imagine a whole bunch of different personalities and professionals. What's it like working the chemistry on trying to pull off a project this size?
Well, again, we're not getting involved in any of those matters, where it comes to a policy of using the resource for whatever use out there. We're looking at it strictly from the impacts to the environment and to the water supply, and any impacts that the use of that water may have on those. And so we're not, getting involved in the kind of the meetings where we're negotiating anything. It's strictly a permit review, a technical analysis.
Sure, you guys are the beaker in the chemistry, so to speak. Yep, just kind of okay. I gotcha. The impact. So I was kind of following this on my notes a little bit. So it sounds to me like some of the wastewater goes down to the Dakota Aquifer, and then the Davis Refinery would pull this back out and then use it as their water. So I mean, it's kind of a recycle process, isn't it?
Well, I don't know that the water that's being injected is actually going to be drawn back in at this site. You know, if we're talking probably distance of miles away to the nearest injection site. I'm just talking about the aquifer as a whole is a zone where water is injected into. So I don't think we're actually pulling out any injected wastewater, but it's water that's already naturally in a brine state where it's not usable for much other than things like refinery processing.
Sure, yeah, and here I'm on the theory side of things, and yeah, I didn't even think about how it's not like liquid underneath, and they suck it up like a straw or anything like that. So, but overall, just kind of if you were to, I guess, summarize the permit process and that sort of thing, I got the picture that the water that's going to be used in this refinery is not used. It's not potable water. It's not drinking water. It's not used in any sort of city system. Now that part I got. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, that's absolutely correct. You know, the water in the Dakota is non-potable water. It's a brine state naturally, and so it's a great candidate really for if you're talking about putting waters of the state to beneficial use to be used in an industrial process.
The permit itself, now the air quality one, we're in this public comment phase. I want to say that's about a week away, probably a week from today. If today's the 10th, I think it's the 17th at the Dorothy Stickney Auditorium in Dickinson, North Dakota. That's been approved, but in public comment. So it's kind of, I call that on like the 5-yard line, so to speak. Did I hear that this has not been approved yet, or it has been approved, or where's the permit at itself?
So I guess I'm not quite sure how the EPA and the health department process works completely, but I can describe how our process works. Basically, there's a comment period upon application. So there's a 30-day period where there's a publication to let everybody know that the permit has been applied for, and I'm talking about the water permit now. There's a direct notification to landowners within a 1-mile radius, and public water suppliers by statute have to be notified. So there then is this 30-day comment period that's established where we collect comments and concerns from the public. Those people that do make comments during that 30-day comment period become parties of record. Then the technical analysis and the response to all of those comments takes place, upon which there's a recommended decision. That recommended decision then is a formal document that will essentially become the final decision, with the exception that there could be additional comments made by those original parties of record. And so in the case of the application we're talking about, there was a recommended decision made, which then was sent to those parties of record for their review and comment, and several of them did make comments, and those parties of record also have the option and the availability to request that there be an adjudicative process held, which is an administrative process through the Office of Administrative Hearings, where it goes to an administrative law judge. So where we're at with this is that the recommendation has been made to approve a certain amount of water from the Dakota Aquifer for the refinery process. And then there has been a call for an adjudicative proceeding, which has been granted. And so right now everything is turned over to the Office of Administrative Hearings for that review by an administrative law judge. And that's a kind of a legal process that is handled mainly by the Office of the Attorney General here, and they are the legal representative for the state that handles in that process right now, and I really can't speculate, what the outcome of that will be. That's going to be up to that administrative law judge.
Sure, I got you. There in the somebody said you didn't dot your I or cross your T, and so they're checking to see if you did. So no, I got it. Okay, I want to switch gears for just a second here, and Jon Patch with us here, State Water Commission, and ask you a little bit about some Bakken water if you had a few minutes. I was going to mention too, we do a weekly thing on the Davis Refinery. In our programming, we think that the Bakken is going to be read and taught in history books years to come, and the Davis Refinery will probably have its own little subchapter because, first one in 50 years, and it's kind of a big deal. And here we follow it every week, and man, it's confusing. I mean, it is so confusing sometimes with these permits and everything along those lines. So thank you for coming on here because it's trying to follow all this, and sometimes it's a little bit difficult. But okay, getting to the Bakken water needed. Did I see a story, or did I see a something about how there's going to be 20 times or 10 times more water needed in the Bakken than originally projected, or was there something along those lines? Did you know anything about this?
Well, I think there's certainly speculation, and it's rightfully so, that water needs are going to increase in the Bakken just because of the additional drilling, the additional new wells that are coming online, the higher amounts of water that are required to frack each new well, and then the refracts that are happening. Plus, there's a thing called maintenance water that is on the horizon that I think everybody has to be looking at and considering, and that maintenance water is water, a small amount, maybe several barrels per day of water that's needed, fresh water I'm talking about, to keep the well operating properly without having an excessive amount of mineral precipitation on the piping that where the water is, or where the oil is flowing out of the well, and you've got changes in temperature and pressure, which allow for certain minerals to precipitate and claw and basically reduce and constrict the size of that. And so to prevent that from happening, you have to add a little bit of fresh water, so that you don't have as much precipitation of those minerals taking place. So that, when you add up that, even though it's only a few barrels per well per day, times the number of producing wells out there, and of course with time it may get worse. Maybe you don't need this right away, but you do need it several years down the road for those older wells at that time. That's going to add up to a lot of water. It could be, exceeding the amount that's needed in the original fracking. And so certainly it's not unreasonable that you're going to see possibly a doubling, and that could just grow from there. But it's somewhat speculation at this point as to how much you're going to need. But then along with the industrial need, you have the population growth that's going to need additional water just for their municipal and rural water needs, human needs. And so whenever you have this sort of thing take place, water is always going to be one of those areas that you have to be concerned about meeting down the road, not just present time. So the area of the state that we're talking about, the western part of the state, is the drier part of our state. There isn't a lot of water on the landscape. A lot of it is rugged badland area where you don't have potholes and sloughs naturally occurring. You don't have a lot of groundwater resource. The groundwater resource that you have out there is protected from industrial development, and that's called the Fox Hills Aquifer. The Fox Hills Aquifer is a regional aquifer that's nearer the surface, obviously, than the Dakota that we were talking about earlier, and it can provide potable water, but it also provides a resource for livestock in the remote areas of the river valleys out there where wells can naturally flow, and so that you have to ensure that you're not going to over pump that aquifer for other uses, for industrial use, for instance, which is going to reduce the heads or the water levels in those wells, so that eventually they may not flow. So, we have to, it's a weighing and balancing of trying to meet where's this water going to come from that's needed out in western North Dakota with the oil boom that's happening, and it's going to continue to happen. And, of course, the answer to that is the Missouri River and both the free-flowing reaches and the reservoir reach of the Missouri River that need to be distributed, out into the landscape where the wells are located.
How many different types of water do we have? I did a story last year on the waters out in western North Dakota, and I kind of understood a little bit about the raw and industrial water. And then there's Western Area Water Supply that's doing reverse osmosis, I believe, water. There's aquifer water. How many different types of water are available out there in the Bakken area? Because you're right, there's not a lot. So a lot of times they're either getting it out of the Missouri or an aquifer, or they're trucking it in some way, aren't they?
Well, I mean, the sources of water are primarily, either your water is coming from a surface water source originally, or from a groundwater source. Those are the aquifers. So the other things that you're mentioning are treatment types that they do to water to help with water quality issues, like the RO, and those are, I think there are some advances being made in reusing water that's already been used in an industrial process like the fracking, so the collection of the flow back and the produced water from the oil production, then treating that through some method, and whether, I'm not sure if that's RO or whatever method they're using, but then they're able to then reuse that water for another well that they need to frack, that obviously must be within a close proximity, because otherwise you're going to truck it or have to pipe it, a distance, and of course that's, as we know, is expensive for them to do. So the most prevalent source of water out there is the Missouri River, the Yellowstone River, and to a lesser degree like the Little Missouri River, Little Muddy River, and those are the primary surface water sources. From the groundwater side, as I mentioned, the Fox Hills Aquifer, the large regional aquifer, is not available for industrial development, but there are smaller glacial systems, especially up in the northern part of the Bakken region, that can be utilized. That requires a permitting process that is somewhat difficult to get through, because usually they want the water right now, and that process takes time. It takes there's mandatory time of public review and comment on a conditional water permit, which is what we're talking about when you pump groundwater. A lot of the surface water that's being utilized there is through a method called a temporary permit. They just obtain a permission to use the water. It's a much lighter review, less rigorous review, but it still requires a technical review by our hydrologists. But we're issuing literally hundreds of temporary water permits per year that's meeting the need, and those are from those smaller sources like the creeks and streams and ponds and sloughs out there that they're going to be used for a period of time, and then they won't be used at that location after a certain a period of time. So a conditional water permit isn't appropriate for them. The temporary permit is the route. No water right to cruise, though, to those folks that are using the temporary permit method.
Jon Patch with us. We're kind of just winding down here a little bit. I wanted to ask you about the recycling of water, and you talked a little bit about that and how some of the oil companies are doing that. Is that something that you're seeing more of an increased use with oil companies? Has that been around for a long time? Just talk to me a little bit more, I guess, about the recycling of water in the oil and gas industry out there.
Yeah, I know that there's attempts being made and looked at it to try to recycle that water, because you have to deal with the wastewater somehow. You're either going to have to take it over and dispose of it, which requires you to truck it. But if you have a way to use that water, especially if you can use it in the immediate vicinity of where you're receiving it from, whether I mentioned like from a flowback of water from a well that you just recently have fracked, and then that's still got some issues with water quality. I understand that you can't just immediately reuse it. You have to do some sort of a treatment on it. And then, of course, you've got the other component of that water that's coming back out, which is called the produced water. That's water that's entrained with the oil in the formation. So when you're pumping the oil well, you're actually getting a certain large amount of that volume is actually water. And that water is very brine, very saline. That definitely needs some sort of a treatment before you could re-inject into another well for a fracking purpose, the way I understand it. So the extent of how much of that is being done, I don't know. I've just heard, and have heard that they've been attempting to do that, just because it's costly to take that water and haul it away and have to dispose of it. Why not reuse it?
I wanted to ask you about a joke that I'd like to reoccur about, and I think one day it might be a reality, but I doubt it. Devil's Lake is increasing every year. Any way we can pipe some of that water out to western North Dakota?
I don't think there would be any problem from a permit standpoint, but I think your economics there would be probably a little bit excessive for it to be feasible.
I've always wondered, because I mean they're talking, it's engulfing towns and it's been going up every single year, and of course the eastern side of the state has their own water management issues, that sort of thing. So I've always wondered why we just can't take that. It sounds to me like you guys are, in all seriousness though, when you were talking about some of the population, some of the water needs, that sort of thing, and we just got done with kind of a story in an interview with the governor, and he's issuing a challenge for 2 million barrels a day. I don't know if that's talked about in your industrial commission meetings yet or your water commission meetings yet, but I would imagine at some point the 2 million barrels a day and the water needs are probably going to have to come head to head, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think we started out talking about the most prevalent supplies out there, and I can't reiterate it enough that the place that needs to be looked at and used is the Missouri River and the free-flowing reaches and the reservoir reach, as well as the Yellowstone River, as areas to move to try to push that out into the other reaches of the Bakken, further away from there through pipelines. That's the most prevalent source. That's the one that we would have no problem issuing permits from, because there is such an abundance of water there that's flowing through the state, and there's no need to try to use up our other resources that are smaller, that are much more limited, when we have such a large available resource in the Missouri River, Yellowstone River.
Well, sir, thank you much. That's all I got for you today. You got anything, final thoughts?
No, I just thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit of our knowledge here from what we do at the Water Commission and State Engineer's Office. Water is what has driven the oil boom. I mean, without water, you wouldn't have the ability to do the hydraulic fracturing, which is what is driving the boom. So we need to, pay attention, and we need to make sure that water is kept in the forefront of those discussions that we've had today. So we appreciate the ability to do that. Thank you.